Hi everyone. As someone who just celebrated their birthday recently, I thought it would be a great idea to talk about prevention and screening for every decade of your life. My name is Shrishti Sharma. I am a board certified preventive medicine physician, and I am here to talk about all things prevention, all things screening, and all things health. As a reminder, prevention are things that you can do in order to make sure you don't have the disease in the first place, while screening is something that you would do to make sure that you catch a disease if you have it early on, so that if there are any treatment options available, you can start the treatment as early as possible. I also want to add that at every stage and every decade of your life, there are different types of physical, mental, and behavioral health counseling and discussions that you need to have with your clinician. I'm not going to include any of those in this video because then the video is going to be too long. Instead, I'll focus on actionable items that you can take or you can discuss with your physician. As I was preparing for this conversation, I realized that prevention and screening in childhood, that is between 0 to 10 years of age, can be pretty extensive, and it would be better to cover in a separate video. Let's start with the second decade of life, that is people between 11 to 19 years of age. When a person is between 11 to 12 years of age, they should be receiving three major vaccines: the HPV vaccine or the human papillomavirus vaccine, the meningococcus vaccine, and the Tdap vaccine. Though girls and boys should be scheduled to receive the HPV vaccine between 11 to 12 years of age, if they miss it, they can receive a catch-up vaccine up to 26 years of age. During this decade, you will also receive your meningococcal vaccine booster at around 16 years of age. It is also during this decade that we start screening for depression, usually around 12 years of age. If a person becomes sexually active during this decade, we would also start screening for sexually transmitted infections. During the next two decades, that is between 20 to 39 years of age, you would not get as many vaccines. However, you would get an annual flu vaccine and a tetanus booster every 10 years. You would continue getting screened for sexually transmitted disease, especially if you are at a higher risk. Screening for HIV is also usually done in this decade, though you should be screened for HIV at least once anytime between 15 to 65 years of age, and more than once if you are at a higher risk for the disease. For women, you would start screening for cervical cancer at around 21 years of age using either pap smear tests or HPV testing. I have made a separate video with details of this cervical cancer screening. Your lipid screening would start at around 35 years of age for men if you are at high risk. If you are overweight or obese, then at around 35 years of age, you'd also start screening for diabetes. The next two decades, that is between 40 to 59 years of age, there are three major prevention guidelines in addition to the ones that I've already spoken about. The first is at around the age of 50 years, you would receive your shingles vaccine. If you have any risk factors, you would get your pneumococcal vaccine. And finally, you would start taking aspirin if your risk of cardiovascular disease is high. And remember, you do need to continue taking your annual flu vaccine. As far as screening is concerned, you would continue getting your blood pressure checked every 2 years or more frequently if you are at a higher risk for cardiovascular disease. You would get your lipids screened every 2 to 5 years depending on your risk factors. You would continue getting screened for diabetes, the frequency of which again depends on your risk factors. At 45 years of age, you would start screening for colorectal cancer. You would have to rescreen every year or every 5 years or every 10 years depending on the method of screening you use. For women, this is also the decade that you would start getting annual or biannual mammograms. If you are between 40 to 49 years of age, the decision to screen for breast cancer is based on your risk factors and definitely something that you should discuss with your physician. But for women between 50 years to 75 years, you would get a mammogram every 1 to 2 years to screen for different kinds of breast cancer. For men, you could start screening for prostate cancer at the age of 50 years, depending on your risk factors. You could also screen earlier if you are at a higher risk for prostate cancer. For smokers, if you're a current smoker, if you have a 20 plus year smoking habit, or if you have quit smoking in the past 15 years, then at around 50 years of age, you would start screening for lung cancer. For high risk individuals, this is also the 2 decades where you would start screening for osteoporosis. For older adults, that is between 60 to 79 years of age, you would continue taking your annual flu vaccine. But in addition, you would also get your pneumococcal vaccine at around 65 years of age. And if you haven't received your shingles vaccine earlier, this is the decade that you would get that as well. As far as screening is concerned, you would continue getting screened for hypertension, diabetes, and lipid or cholesterol disorders, the frequency of which depends on your individual risk factors. Everyone would continue getting screened for colorectal cancer until the age of 75 or even later if your individual risk factors are high enough. And women would continue getting screened for breast cancer until between ages of 74 and 75, longer if your risk for breast cancer is high. Prostate cancer screening for men, on the other hand, could continue from anywhere between 55 to 70 years of age. Again, the screening options are individualized based on your individual risk. All women above the age of 65 years of age would be screened for osteoporosis. Men are screened for osteoporosis depending on their risk factors. This is also the decade that you would be screened for cognitive impairment or any issues with memory or functioning, especially if there are any concerns. At this point, you would also be screened for depression. And finally, for all individuals above the age of 80 years or for the elderly population, you would continue getting your annual flu vaccines. You would get your pneumococcal vaccines if you haven't gotten it already, and you would continue getting your Tdap boosters or tetanus boosters, whatever is applicable to you, every 10 years. For elderly populations, there are no screening recommended as such, but obviously, if you're at a higher risk for any of the diseases, then you would have an individualized conversation with your physician. Your diabetes, high blood pressure, and your lipid screening would continue based on your risk factors or your existing diseases. During this decade, you would continue screening for your cognitive function, but at this time you would also be screened for hearing or vision loss. And finally, you would be screened for osteoporosis and fracture risks as it's applicable for you. What I have spoken about today is U.S. Preventive Services Task Force recommendations for individuals in different age groups. There are some very specific recommendations for different groups of people depending on their risk. For instance, there are different recommendations for individuals who are pregnant. There are different recommendations for individuals who are at high risk for certain diseases. And most importantly, there are a whole different set of recommendations for children between birth and 10 years of age, which I have not covered in this video. I know the list was exhaustive, but I hope you found it useful to see what screening and prevention services could be available to you or for your loved ones so that you can discuss it with your clinician the next time you visit them. Until then, I hope you continue screening, preventing, and staying healthy. Thanks for watching.